Hello, my name is Greg Lassley. I'm primarily a wildlife photographer, and I live in Dripping Springs. And I was privileged to be asked to judge this photo contest, which for the month of July, the competition subject was solitude. The way I approached judging the images was to read the definition of solitude that was provided to the members to try to get in my own head what the definition was given as far as solitude. And after doing that a number of times, I would look through all of the images and just see how each one initially struck me as to whether I felt that really portrayed solitude or strongly gave me the impression of solitude. So I kind of went through all of the images kind of one go-round, and then I'd do the same thing again. I did this a number of times without thinking about any scoring or anything of that nature. So then eventually, after being through all the images a number of times, I started trying to apply scores depending on how the image combination of things like the composition, focus, the way the subject of solitude came across in the image to me, various things. So that was sort of my take on the judging. Judging is always subjective, and someone else may have totally done this, awarded different scores to every image. Of course, that's always going to be the case. And so my judging was the way my interpretation of each image reflected the subject matter and the definition of solitude. We'll get started from there. In the beginners category, the first image here is called A New Dawn, and I gave it a score of 8. The scene shows a fishing camp or a structure of some sort, probably a floating structure along a coastline or a bay scene, and it looks like a little lonely cabin. And certainly it portrays solitude, but it didn't quite grab me as strongly as some of the other images did as far as portraying solitude. I probably would have made the house less of an emphasis and the big scene, the whole scene of a lonely bay somewhere, a little bit stronger and the house less strong. The next image is called Winter at Caddo Lake, and I gave that a score of 8. This is a winter scene in northeast Texas at Caddo Lake, presumably showing cypress trees lacking any leaves, with cypress knees coming up out of the water adjacent to the trees. And again, it's a nature scene, certainly portrays a location out in the wild, and it does portray solitude, but it didn't quite grab me with the subject matter as strongly as it could have. I think focusing on one or two trees doesn't portray the solitude to me quite the same way as a small subject like a person surrounded by the great landscape might portray solitude. But it's certainly a lovely image of the cypress in winter. The next image is called Alone in the Garden. I gave it a score of 9. And it shows a butterfly on top of a yellow flower. I love the composition. The butterfly is looking into the frame. Its cropping is more horizontal and not as tall vertically, which I think adds to this photograph. It's more of a nature or wildlife scene. The pink flowers to the right side and the yellow flowers to the left with the butterfly makes it a lovely wildlife image, but it didn't grab me as much with solitude as the theme. Next image is called Time with Dad, and I gave it a score of 10, and it shows a man and a daughter walking along a jetty with the ocean crashing in the background, and it's in a sepia tone, which adds a lot to the image, I think. I think if it was just a standard color image, it wouldn't be quite as captivating, but as it is, I like the composition very much. I like the way the two people are walking into the image. I like the waves in the background. I like the granite jetty. I think it does a good job of showing two people on a lonely spot. The next image is called Rush Hour in the Gobi. I gave it a score of 10, and it shows a number of horses walking across a grassland with a very scenic, expressive sky above and the yellow-brown grasslands below. I think it's a beautiful shot. Some people don't like composition where the horizon is right straight in the middle of the image, as this one. But I actually don't fault it for that at all. I kind of like images like that rather than necessarily having to be 1/3 sky and 2/3 the landscape or vice versa. I actually like this sort of image. And it shows the horses that are going across a lonely grassland and certainly portrays solitude. The next image is called Mine Alone for Now, and I gave it a score of 12. And I ranked it as 3rd place in the beginners category, and it's by Jim Walsh. I felt strongly like I was looking at solitude when I saw this image with massive cliffs rising above the ocean in the background, with a person or maybe carrying a child walking along the shoreline. The people seem very small and they are dwarfed by the image in general. It does give a sense of solitude and smallness to the human subjects, but it also expresses the majesty of the landscape, and it just caught my eye right away as being very expressive of the term solitude. The next image is called Sunrise Serenity, and I gave it a score of 13, and I also gave it a 2nd place in the beginners category, and it is by Bruce Barlow. It shows a girl sitting on the edge of presumably the Grand Canyon at sunrise, and again, this sort of image does strike me as the majesty of nature, and then the smallness of the way a person can be. It caught my eye right away. I think the composition is wonderful. The early morning lighting where the sun is lighting up the very distant walls of the canyon as well as the nearby side of the mountain, and the person that's more inconsequential as this person looks out onto the natural landscape caught my attention and seemed like a good representation of solitude. The next image is called Ultimate Aloneness, Victim in the Killing Fields of Cambodia. And I gave this a score of 13, and I gave it a 1st place award in the beginner category, and it's by John Paul Douglas. And at first, when I went through the images, this caught my eye. And since it shows a human skull, and it's a different sort of solitude, a different sort of aloneness than natural scenes in the middle of a canyon or a seascape or something like that. And I looked at it, and it caught my attention, and I went on. But about the 2nd or 3rd time that I came through the images, this kept grabbing me. It kept pulling me into it. And so for anyone who's read about what happened in Cambodia in the 1970s, I think that you're caught up in the tragedy of all this, and it is ultimate aloneness and perhaps ultimate solitude. And the image kept grabbing me and bringing me back to it, and it finally just captivated me totally. And again, I gave it a 1st place in the beginner category. Moving on to the intermediate category, the first image is called Southwestern Sunset, and I gave it a score of 8. It shows the orange of the sunset in the background, silhouetting some vegetation. It's a beautiful sunset picture. It doesn't quite grab me as far as the term solitude quite as strongly as some other images did. A lovely shot of a southwestern sunset that could be nature, could be a number of subjects. The next image is the 9th inning. I gave it a score of 8, and it shows a baseball player. Gives you a feeling that, at least to me, it looks like he's looking out onto the field of play and he might be losing. It's coming down to the 9th inning, and maybe they're not gonna succeed. And I like the shot very much. It didn't quite strike me as much as, although it does certainly portray solitude and a feeling of loneliness, especially if you're losing in the 9th inning and you don't see a way out. I certainly get that. Portrays that very well. I thought it was a good shot. It just didn't strike me as much about solitude as maybe some of the natural images do. The next image is called Only Nature Listens Here, and I gave it a score of 8. And it shows a path through a wooded area, through the trees, lovely natural landscape with sunlight shining through the trees in spots here and there. A good natural image, certainly would portray being alone in a wooded area. Again, I think it's a nice shot. The next shot is called Isolated, and I gave it a score of 8. And it shows the side of a building with a bird flying up against the side of the building. And it, the architecture of the building, the shadows play into it very nicely. It gives you good depth. You feel like you can feel the space in between the concrete, and the pigeon being alone against the concrete, I think, lends to it. And again, a good image that would certainly show the solitude of that bird against the side of a huge building. Next image is called Lone Hunter, and I gave it a score of 9. And it shows a great egret at the edge of a water feature of some sort, but the egret is staring intently into the water at the base of the waterfall. The composition is good, again, with the egret looking into the frame of the image. The egret is paying attention to what's in front of it. Nice natural history image of an egret at work. The next image is called Alone Time, and I gave it a score of 9. And it shows a man on a dock or a jetty in a bay, either early morning or late evening, with orange sky in the background. You can see the lights of a town in the distance and a water tower, and a man alone on a jetty. And it's a very contemplative shot. You can feel that the person is considering life, considering what's going on around him. It's an image that evokes some emotion, and I thought it did a good job of showing the term solitude. The next image is me and my thoughts, and I gave it a score of 10. It shows a person sitting on a bench on the edge of a waterway of some sort with a beautiful, beautiful sky with sun rays coming through the clouds. Almost surreal looking. It's a black and white image, and it conveys a lot of feeling of the sky and the surroundings and a person sitting and looking out across the water. And it certainly does project solitude, and with the sky in the background, I think it's a very nice shot. The next shot is called Little Girl in Bluebonnet Trail, and I gave it a score of 10. And it shows a little blonde-haired girl running toward bluebonnets in a field. Beautiful shot and lots of color. Texas springtime scene, obviously, with paintbrush and bluebonnet and trees in the background and a little girl running toward the flowers. I think it's a great photo. It doesn't grab me as much as defining the word solitude as it does perhaps joy or nature or just a beautiful shot of a little girl running in the flowers, but I think it's a great image. The photographer should be real proud of the shot. The next image is called Waiting. I gave it a score of 11, and it shows a man sitting on a bench in front of a red brick building with 2 windows with wonderful reflections in the windows of trees, whether he's waiting for a bus or just contemplating the world. That's left to your imagination. The composition, I think, is great. I love the texture of the bricks, the repair, the mortar in between the bricks above the windows, the way the mortar stair steps up where there's been some repair done to the brick. I love the reflection of the trees and the man sitting there alone on a park bench or waiting for a bus or whatever. I think it's a very nice shot. It doesn't grab me as much as solitude, as just the image just showing one person, but perhaps you could widen it out and see lots of other people. It didn't quite grab me quite as much about solitude as some of the other images do, but it's a great shot. The next shot is titled Alone, and I gave it a score of 11, and it shows a man, a double amputee, writing something in a notebook, sitting on a bench. His wheelchair is next to him. It strikes me several different ways. Certainly you can say solitude. A man sitting there writing who is a double amputee and looking at the camera certainly does portray solitude. It's also perhaps an urban scene, of a man who's been through a lot. It evokes a lot of emotion looking at it. Not as much solitude to me as perhaps some other images do, but certainly aloneness, and you can certainly feel a lonely connection with the person. But I think it's a really nice image. The next shot is called Crystal Bridges, and I gave it a score of 11. And it shows a lady inside a building with a gorgeous wooden roof in ribs of arches going over the top. An amazing structure. Photograph. The image captures the roof and the reflections and the windows in a very unique way, and it's quite an image and quite a building. And the lady, of course, sitting alone would portray a person sitting there with their thoughts, and so of course it does portray a sense of solitude. The next image is titled Looking and Not Seeing. I gave it a score of 11 and also an honorable mention. It is by James Haynes. It shows a man sitting on a bench in the middle of massive live oak trees. And I love the way the live oaks and their arching branches in all directions are almost like a cathedral over the top of the man sitting on the bench. It made me feel very much that the man was dwarfed by his surroundings, which to me lends a sense of solitude and aloneness with the world, aloneness with nature, and just the massive trees just make this shot. The next image is called Astenia. I gave it a score of 12 and third place in the intermediate category. And it's a black and white image that only works in black and white. I think if this was a color image, it wouldn't be as captivating. But I think the black and white with the shadows on it shows a lone tree with distant hills beyond it and prairies and cactus. And I think with the black and white, it looks very stark, very alone. The tree looks very alone, if you will. It struck me as grabbing you and pulling you into the image of looking at this tree that has obviously seen lots of years of weather and storms and broken branches around the base of it. The tree's been through a lot, and now it's dead and in its last years of even standing. But it just caught me as a really interesting image, and I thought the image was great. The next image is called Solitude Shared, and I gave it a score of 13, and I also gave it a second place in the intermediate category, and it is by Valerie Johnson. And it shows two people standing on the top of a rock outcropping, looking out across the horizon. The composition with them off to the very far left of the image and gazing out to the very distant horizon, I think is very captivating. I think the image works in black and white, and it just did portray to me, the first time I saw it, a real sense of the subject matter of this month's work. The next image is called Beauty of Solitude, and I gave it a score of 14. I awarded it first place in the intermediate category, and it's by Don Champlin. And it shows at least what struck me as a Native American with an incredible beam of light coming across the image with the person looking off into the unknown distance. And it just caught me as a lovely image, very much the definition of solitude. The light across the background makes the image very captivating. And I thought it's a great shot, and it caught me the first time I saw it. I think it's a lovely image. Okay, we've now moved into the advanced level. The first image is called Peter is Late for Our Date Again. I gave it a score of 9, and it shows a young woman in costume with perhaps butterfly wings on her back, and she is not very happy. She has a great exasperated look on her face that I find just charming, and I'm glad I'm not Peter. I thought it was a really nice shot. It carries a lot of emotion with her attitude, conveys her sense of frustration, and thought it was a great shot. It wasn't quite as captivating to me as far as solitude as perhaps it could be, but I think it's a really cute image. The next shot is called Wooded Trail, and I gave it a score of 9. And it's a trail through birches or aspens. It shows a footpath through the thick underbrush. It's lovely lighting, perhaps pretty much straight overhead lighting filtering down through the tree leaves and illuminating the path area and the underbrush. It's a lovely, lovely shot. Does show certainly a sense of being out in the woods. The next shot is called An Autumn Walk, and I gave it a score of 9. It's a shot of a trail or a bikeway or a hiking trail along through fall color in leaves with some rocky backgrounds. It does portray another, like the previous image, a sense of being out in the woods along a hiking trail. Lovely image that does certainly show the fall colors in the trees really nicely. Next image is called Evening Meditation, and I gave it a score of 10. And it shows a home with table and chairs and a lovely garden and a beautiful, beautiful evening sky, orangey red. Just a lovely landscape of the property. Certainly a contemplative image, but it does a good job of showing the landscape and the home and just the natural wonder of our world. The next image is Lonelier Than a Broken Heart. I gave it a score of 10. And it shows a young girl in a swimming pool or in water. You can tell the title being Lonelier Than a Broken Heart. Perhaps the girl is very frustrated or sad about some situation in her life, but she has a facial expression that draws you in and you want to know more, and it does captivate you quite a bit. And I was emotionally struck to look at her face, and I think it's a lovely shot of this girl. The next shot is called Doesn't Get Any Better Than This, and I gave it a score of 10. And it shows white sand beaches, the green of the ocean, and dark, maybe distant storms in the sky. It gives you a tropical feel. Lovely shot of a lonely beach with a beautiful contrast between the sky and the ocean, and certainly reflects an impression of solitude. The next shot is called Nature's Meditation, and I gave it a score of 11. And it shows what I presume is a sunset with a person sitting in the foreground, looking out across the water at the background and the sun. Lovely shot, silhouetted person, does reflect solitude strongly, and it was a shot that caught my eye right away when I first looked through them. I think it's a beautiful image. The next shot is called Spring is Here. And it shows a mute swan in the foreground, mountains in the background, church in a town, and the bird is in the foreground. But it's a lovely landscape shot, and I probably failed to say that I gave this a score of 11. But anyway, I think it's a really nice landscape shot with a good, wonderful cloud cover, wonderful background. The next image is called Pacific Meditation, and I gave it a score of 12. And it shows a lady on a bench overlooking the seacoast, and you can see for miles along the ocean as the waves crash on the sandy beaches. And she's on a high headland above the ocean. Certainly it evokes a very strong sense of solitude. I thought it was just a really nice shot. The next shot is called A Lonely Place, and I gave it a score of 12 and gave it an honorable mention, and it is by Bud Barlow. And it shows a lady sitting on a bottle as if lost in alcohol problems or something of that nature. And it shows a water drop superimposed around this woman, or a drop of liquid around this woman as she sits on this bottle with a background of trees and snowbanks and things of that nature. But it's a very sad image. You look at the person's face and it evokes a great deal of emotion for me when you look and see her lost look. And the title A Lonely Place, I think, does an excellent job of portraying what you see in this lady's face. The next image is called Sunset on the Lake. I gave it a score of 12. And I gave it the third place in the advanced category, and it is by Sam Wilson. And it shows a sailboat on a lake with orange and yellow skies of the sunset behind it, The sailboat is small and it is overwhelmed by the sky and the lake around it, and so it does convey to me a very strong sense of solitude. There's no other human activity visible except for the one sailboat, and so it caught my eye quickly as portraying solitude. The next image is just titled Solitude, and I gave it a score of 12, as well as second place in the advanced category, and it's by Jim Spencer. And it shows a person with a bicycle on top of a cliff looking out over the ocean. And it is a black and white image with very strong, it pulls you to the image to want to know more about it. The seacoast is rough and rugged with rock outcroppings. There's a wave rolling in, and this one very small person looking out over the vastness in front of him just really caught my emotion. The next image is called Serenity, and I gave it a score of 13, and I gave it the first place in the advanced category, and it's by Marie Hansen, and it shows an elderly lady simply sitting in a chair in wonderful light, and again, serenity. It just evokes, you can tell she's old, you can tell she's got medical issues because of the oxygen tubes in her nose and just the whole scene, but it does evoke serenity. A lady who has lived a long and good life and is perhaps contemplating the world and her life. It caught my emotion quickly, and I think the photographer did a great job in capturing the feeling of solitude with this image. Okay, we've moved to the master category, and the first image is titled Slightly Weathered, and I gave it a score of 10, and it shows a very weathered juniper cedar in a western desert scene with mountains in the background. And Slightly Weathered is a great title. It's a tree that's perhaps part of it's been broken off, and it's probably been around for a long time, but the tree shows a lot of character. The striations in the trunk are very expressive of damage and weather and years the tree has been through. It was a great shot showing this tree against the western rocky landscape. Next shot is called Clear Dawn, and I gave it a score of 10, and it shows a tree without leaves on the top, a hilltop with just a blank sky behind it. So the tree is very much the focus of the image. You don't have any clouds to distract you from the tree. Your focus is drawn right to the tree. I think the composition is very nice with the tree capturing you when you first look at the image. And it does portray a good sense of solitude. The next image is called Sunset Years, and I gave it a score of 10, and it's an evening picture with the moon above a lone tree on a landscape with bright red evening sky perhaps behind it, and it also captures, your focus is drawn to the tree and the moon. You contemplate certainly solitude by seeing it. The next image is called Flying Solo, and I gave it a score of 11, and it shows a seabird coming at the photographer from the ocean and a rocky outcropping behind. You know, this caught my eye also. I enjoy wildlife, and I enjoy birds and other wildlife, and so this caught my eye immediately, and it does give you a good sense of the aloneness of the bird as it flies off of the ocean. I think the bird being in great focus with a little bit of softness to the rocks in the background lends a nice touch to this scenic shot of this bird. The next shot is called Alone by the Sea, and I gave it a score of 11, and shows a person sitting on the rocks right at the coast with a wave crashing right in front of the individual. Since the person is a little bit bigger in the frame, and you don't quite get the largeness of the background in the ocean so much, it didn't catch me as much, or it didn't strike me as much as solitude as perhaps it could have if the individual was less the focus of it. but the image still works very nicely. I think it's a great shot, a good action shot of the wave crashing right in front of the person. The next shot is called Alone with My Art, and I gave it a score of 11. It shows a lady painting with her easel and brushes. You can see her subject matter, buildings, and landscape in front of her. And it gives a sense of an artist at work. No other people are visible in the image. You see the city in the background, but you still get a real sense of her being alone and concentrating totally on what she's doing. And I thought it was a really nice shot. The next shot is called Watching and Waiting, and I gave it a score of 12. And it shows a fisher person in the perhaps late evening with a city across the water in the background with the lighted buildings, orange sky right at the horizon, darker sky above, fishing pole up in a rod holder as this fisherman is looking out across the water. It's a very nice shot. I think it evokes a sense of solitude and of person out in nature watching the evening progress. The next shot is called The Lonely Photographer, and I gave it a score of 12. And it shows a photographer carrying his gear walking across a tidal flat toward the water. And it also portrays a good sense of solitude as the person is heading out to try to capture some images. I love the tracks in the sand. As you can see, photographers are very easily distracted by one thing here, one thing there, and you can see that he's, from his tracks, that he's wandered around a little bit on his trek to the ocean. The next image is called Alone on the Edge, and I gave it a score of 12. And it shows a person looking out across the vast landscape of the American West. I love the cropping with the person way off to the side and the vast landscape spread out before him all the way to infinity virtually. And I love the texture of the light on the near canyon wall to him, and then the darker shadows, a little sparkling of the river way in the distance. And so again, I think it's a really great shot that indicates solitude. The next image is called Alone with the Camera in the Sunset, and I gave it a score of 12. And I gave it an honorable mention in the master category, and it's by Maria Downey. This image shows a photographer with a large format gear and a tripod looking out at the sunset on an ocean scene on top of beautiful round boulders somewhere not in Texas, but just a great scene of the photographer looking at the ocean in the distance. It captured my imagination when I saw it, and every time I'd go back to it, I kept being drawn to this image. Just very representative of what a photographer does to photograph a scene. The next image is called Alone at Hilltop Ruins. I gave it a score of 12, as well as an honorable mention in the master category. And it shows some old stone ruins of some of the Native American peoples somewhere in the American West. Even though there are no people or trees or animals in this view, I think the ruins of the building itself just evoke a sense of solitude because people were here. This was someone's home, and now they're gone, but their spirit remains. And I don't know, I kept being drawn back to this image. I think the sky is lovely. I think the lighting, I'm presuming very late evening light, is just lighting up the entire background as well as the stone ruins, and it just caught my imagination every time I saw it. The next shot is called At Peace in Her Simple Hugan, Susie Yazzie, presumably a Native American woman. I gave this a score of 13, as well as third place in the master category, and it is by Ernie Taxick. I really like the image, but we're looking at a Native American elderly lady sitting in front of her loom inside a structure with a box that says "Thank you very much." So I suspect she's maybe blind, maybe limited in physical capacity, but it's just the image evokes a lot of emotion looking at this elderly person who probably needs some help with various things in her life, but she's lived a long and strong life, and you can still see the proudness of her and her heritage reflected in her face. I thought it was a very nice shot. The next image is called Sunset Solitude at Peggy's Cove Light, and I gave it a score of 13, as well as second place in the master category, and it's by Lee Hatfield. The image shows a lighthouse, vertical format cropping that with the long lighthouse, and then the water in the lower part of the image, the shape of the water pool, and the person standing at the end, I think adds a lot to the image, just the cropping and the composition with the brightly lit cloud bank behind the lighthouse. I think it captures a lot of emotion in the shot with the person standing near the lighthouse. It does evoke a feeling of aloneness or solitude with the person in the lighthouse and really nothing else visible except the reflection in the water. But I thought it was just a great shot. The next image is called Cold and Alone, and I gave it a score of 13, as well as first place in the master category, and it's by Ron Hasty. It's a black and white image of a bull American bison walking slowly across probably a creek bed in a snow-covered landscape. You can see the snow encrusted on the animal and his beard and the hairs on his legs. You can tell from the crusted snow on the animal that it is bitterly cold and the animal is alone. This evoked a real strong sense of solitude in me, and not all solitude has to do with humans. I think this animal across this frozen landscape, walking in this creek bed, heading off to looking for food or water or whatever, I think just evoked a strong sense of solitude for me, and I thought it was just a wonderful, wonderful image. As far as the best in show image, the image I selected is Cold and Alone by Ron Hasty, which I'd previously described. I just was really caught by this image, and every time I saw it, I kept being drawn into it as a wonderful example of solitude. I think black and white adds to the power of the image. I think an image in regular color would not be as strong. And I think it's a great shot, and Mr. Hasty should be really proud of it. In closing, I just would like to say I appreciate the opportunity to judge these 50 images. All of the images were good, and it was a privilege for me to be able to see this work. I think all of the photographers involved put a lot of effort into this. I wish I could have given awards to each and every one of them. It's very hard to do this sort of thing. I found myself struggling and going back and forth between many images many times trying to decide which ones got awards, but of course I was limited to first, second, and third, and the occasional honorable mention. But I felt very torn by doing it. It was very difficult. And I think all of the images had quite a bit of merit, and it was a privilege to be able to see them. Judging is harder to do than you might imagine if you've never done it. And of course, all judging is subjective, and someone far more talented as a photographer than I am might sit down with these same 50 images and come up with something totally different set of awards. And that's easily to be expected. I think that we all look at things based on our own life experience, based on our own backgrounds. My background being more in nature photography certainly causes some bias in the way I look at things. I tried to be totally objective in what I was seeing and how I was voting, but I think all of us tend to have biases in the type of photos we like and the type of photos that maybe we don't like so well. But I think everyone involved here did a really great job, and all of you should be very proud of your work, and I appreciate the opportunity to have seen it. Thank you very much.